A few days ago, the Justice Department received a tip-off. Some serfs were secretly peddling grain. After some investigation, they had a lead. Some police decided to shed their uniforms, put on tattered jackets, and brought along a sweeper while keeping an eye on all suspects. A man pushed a cart full of snow quickly appeared, and saw a serf at a street corner. He cautiously looked around before slowly approaching the blonde serf. After inspecting the contents of a cloth bag, the man pulled out a bag of coins. But just as the blonde serf began counting, police officers rushed from all directions. The man was pinned to the ground. Seeing the dire situation, the blonde serf tried to escape. Wade quickly swept at him with his broom, picked up the coins, and told them they were under arrest. Roland got wind of the situation through Carter. He had always known this day might come, but still, when it did, he felt a pang of helplessness. The trial was set to take place in the castle hall. Roland summoned Barav to the castle to jointly adjudicate the grain smuggling case. In the hall, the two apprehended suspects knelt on the ground. Roland, seated prominently, asked them to recount their actions. Both men hurriedly explained their grain trade. The balding man is a resident of the town and explained that he hadn't consumed all the grain he'd bought from the city hall. He processed the remainder into flour, mixed it with wild vegetables, and sold the resulting pancakes in the market. He made a decent profit each month, but to earn a bit more, he had to scrimp and save. Since he couldn't save enough, he approached serfs who hadn't sold all their grain to the city hall. Hearing this, the serf also confessed, yelling out that he was guilty. But he explained that if he didn't sell the grain, he wouldn't survive. He claimed that the officials didn't purchase grain as per Roland's instructions, leaving him with no other choice. By then, the entire case was quite straightforward. From their testimonies, Roland had a clear understanding. After all, the strict prohibition against selling grain privately had been repeatedly emphasized. Still, some would risk it all for a small profit. However, what did the serf mean that the officials weren't buying grain according to the rules? When questioned, the officials responded without hesitation. They had followed Roland's directives. After a bountiful harvest, they never halted their grain purchase. However, they gradually lowered the buying price based on the grain's quality. For the first couple of months, the price was the same throughout. But as winter approached, most serfs lacked proper storage facilities, leading to a sharp decline in the grain's quality. During the purchase, they frequently found damp, discolored, or moldy grains. That's why the price has been reduced by 20 to 30%. As for the blonde serf's grain, the majority was damp and moldy, unedible grain that was nearly impossible to store any longer and would have to be thrown out upon purchase. Therefore, the only price they could offer was about 20% of the price compared to the first couple of months. Before Roland could question why didn't the serf sold the grain upon harvest, the serf suddenly shouted, 20% is no different from not buying at all. He then played the victim card, saying he has been toiled in the fields all year, and the price he got from his crops is merely nothing. He even claimed that even the back alley dealers wouldn't be so ruthless. Barav snapped back, had the serf sold on time, none of this would have happened. Everyone here is aware of the serf's true intentions for hoarding grains. If the town ever faces a grain shortage, the serf would be selling it at multiple times the price. But even in the month of the demons, the border town had sufficient food for everyone, resulting in the serf's plan to fail. The case's details were now clear, but the outcome surprised Roland. He initially thought it was a simple case of grain smuggling, only to discover it also entailed selling substandard food. The balding resident, fully aware of the poor quality of the grain, had agreed to purchase it at half its value, likely not caring whether the moldy grain was edible. What would happen if someone got severely poisoned by the pancakes he made and sold? After discussing with Barav for a moment, Roland finally rendered his verdict: both men were guilty. The blonde serf was punished for violating the rules, while the balding resident faced punishment for using substandard moldy grain to make and sell pancakes to other townsfolk. While Roland felt a twinge of regret, as the inaugural case of its kind, a stringent penalty was needed. He instructed the officials to create a public notice about the incident, hoping to deter such occurrences in the future. When Roland asked Carter if Wade had been responsible for the arrest, Carter nodded. However, the fact that Wade had ditched his uniform and was reported by citizens as being involved in a brawl during the apprehension made Carter feel he should reprimand him. But Roland shook his head, believing Carter should commend Wade instead. Wade knows how to adapt, Roland thought. This time, acting undercover to arrest the culprit shows he's a natural investigator. When the time is right, he should recruit Wade into the security bureau. Inside a secret chamber of the Hermes Cathedral, Isabella held a torch in one hand and gripped Tayfun's arm with the other. Though Tayfun was puzzled as to why the newly appointed pope had requested to meet him here, Isabella explained that Maine had a profound trust in Tayfun, the archbishop with whom he'd worked for so long. It was time for Tayfun to be privy to deeper secrets. Tayfun sighed, thinking of the two new archbishops. They had already struggled with merely accepting the existence of the pure ones. How long would it take them to adjust? Isabella whispered, the new archbishops haven't fully understood the pure ones yet. Of course, assist archbishops in tasks that cannot see the light of day. Besides that, they can offer companionship at night, serve as an outlet for anger, or even provide other forms of entertainment. She drew nearer to Tayfun suggestively. Tayfun swiftly pulled his arm away, admonishing her to refrain from making such a joke with an old man like him. They soon arrived at another room, guarded by a witch named Black Veil. She instructed Tayfun to entrust her with the god punishment stone he was carrying. Her gaze felt as if it pierced through him, prompting Tayfun to reluctantly take the stone hidden within his robes. Once the stone was secured, Black Veil opened the chamber's doors. Inside, Maine stood playing with two magic stones in his hand. He warmly greeted his old friend, assuring Tayfun that they were in private and he could be at ease. Tayfun felt a comforting warmth in his heart, yet he remained ever conscious of the church's hierarchy. Pope Maine chuckled, asserting that his words were the new embodiment of order. Quickly shifting the topic, he inquired about what was happening outside. Tayfun reported on the church's recent affairs, notably the order to apprehend witches. One of the witches had escaped, and in the pursuit of her, many believers, including prospective judgment soldiers, had died. He feared that such incidents, if they persisted, would instill a dread of witch hunting among the church's members. Maine had summoned Tayfun primarily for this very matter. He stated that combat witches were only a minuscule fraction. Most of the witches lacked the power to resist. Such confrontations would be rare. He hoped that Tayfun would increase his efforts so they could produce even more god punishment soldiers. The pressure on the Hermes defensive line grew daily, and they urgently required more god punishment soldiers to combat the demonic beasts. Looking at Maine, Tayfun observed how the former youngster had become more decisive and mature since his ascension to the Pope. Tayfun also brought good news. Apart from a few cities that continued to resist, the majority of nobles in the Wolfheart Kingdom had already pledged allegiance to them. However, when the conversation shifted to the Kingdom of Dawn. The Kingdom of Dawn had recently been expelling church believers, leading to uprisings and riots. His men were covertly aiding the rebels. Maine nodded in understanding. He believed that next year's offensive strategy needed adjustment, prioritizing the capture of the Grey Castle. Maine perceived signs of decline in Grey Castle. Maine knew the fight for the throne decree and the church's pills had achieved their intended effects. The Kingdom of Dawn was also plagued by internal strife. The downfall of both was inevitable, so the order in which they were dealt with didn't matter much. Maine was most concerned about Roland Wimbledon, saying he is not just an ordinary lord. Maine believes that Roland might be the greatest threat they've ever encountered. There was an unmistakable seriousness in his voice. He knows their believers are powerful, but they must not underestimate this man. He is not suggesting Roland possesses supernatural abilities, but Roland certainly has some sort of talent or strategy that has allowed him to defeat both Church and Grey Castle forces. Tayfun nodded in agreement. Maine then explained the reasons why he wanted to capture Grey Castle first. The first reason is that the Grey Castle covers the most extensive territory and has the richest resources, offering greater benefits than conquering the Kingdom of Dawn. The second reason, a chilling look appeared in Main's eyes as he uttered the name Roland Wimbledon. Taefun looked a bit taken aback. Main turned to him, explaining that over the past year, Main had come across an astonishing piece of intelligence. No matter whether it was actions taken by the church or those by the Grey Castle against Roland, every attempt failed without exception. Outsiders believed that Roland had allied himself with demons to defeat Duke Ryan's knights. Yet, the church knew that apart from those witches with extraordinary abilities, one or two witches wouldn't pose any threat to fully armed knights equipped with stones of God punishment. Subsequent intelligence became more and more baffling. For instance, a secret letter sent to the Holy City 2 months ago mentioned that the new King Timothy had dispatched nearly 2,000 soldiers, all consuming the church's pills, to attack the Western territories. Yet, they were defeated upon the first encounter. What did this imply? Taefun couldn't help but take a sharp intake of breath. 2,000 frenzied soldiers. Even in Hermes, this was a force to be reckoned with. If things drag on for another year, perhaps the Grey Castle would fall into Roland's hands. And by that time, the cost to annex Grey Castle would be significantly higher. Main looked to Taefun. With so much on his plate, Main hoped to delegate some responsibilities to Taefun. After the archbishop left, the two witches waiting outside bowed. Taefun acknowledged them with a nod and then departed. As the archbishop exited, the room underwent a transformation. The Pope's figure gradually faded, morphing into Zero. Zero praised the illusion created by Black Veil, noting how it's becoming more and more realistic. Zero patted her chest. Though she had consumed Main and was familiar with his memories and consciousness, she found it relatively easy to deceive the old man. However, whenever Main's conservative thoughts resurfaced, she found them quite tedious. Isabella sat on a table, twirling her hair, remarking how interesting the fourth prince of Grey Castle appeared to be. She even thought he held more promise in defeating the demons than the church. Black Veil shot her a displeased glance, asking what she meant by that. Was she suggesting a betrayal of the church? The two began to bicker. Isabella argued that wasn't the church established to ensure humanity's survival in the Divine War? If someone else could achieve that, she wouldn't mind whom she served. Zero interjected, urging them to stop arguing. She believed Isabella had a point. In the so-called Divine War, only the ultimate victor would be the favored one of the gods. She looked at the two and said, "As for whom the gods will smile upon, whether it's the Federation or a prince from Grey Castle, only through this war would provide the answer." In Sir Eltek's residence, Sir Eltek and his steward hurriedly rushed to the door, questioning his son Miso about why he was wearing armor. Miso stated his intention to join Lord Mead to gain honor and rank. He informed his father that Lord Mead had gathered most of the nobles from the western territories in his castle and brought with him a letter penned by the king himself. The letter promised that anyone who assisted in capturing the Canggu stronghold would have their titles and territories elevated. Upon hearing this, Sir Eltek involuntarily stepped back, his heart sinking. Jacques Mead was the eldest son of the Mead family, and now it seemed the new king, Timothy, was also involved. Everyone knew that Roland Wimbledon of the Western Territories was at the top of Timothy's list of adversaries. When he learned that the four major families had immediately decided to act upon receiving the letter, the elderly Sir Eltek exclaimed in anger, questioning if Miso had forgotten how Duke Ryan met his demise. Miso dismissively replied that this time was different. The king had delivered a batch of snowpowder weapons, the same kind used by the fourth prince. According to Lord Mead, even more powerful weapons were on their way, and without the advantage of these weapons, Roland was sure to be defeated. Miso belted his long sword, donned his helmet, mounted his horse, bid his father farewell, and rode off into the distance. The old lord, livid, threw his cane after him, but Miso had already spurred his horse, rushing towards the battlefield. Miso, full of himself, thought he would bring glory back to his family. The old lord was so infuriated that he was out of breath. The housekeeper looked at Sir Eltek with concern. However, Sir Eltek said, he fears their family faces imminent disaster. The housekeeper comforted him, what if the 4 major families won? The month of demons is still ongoing, and the snow needs at least 3 more months to melt. By the time the 4th prince arrives, perhaps the king's army would have already surrounded the entire western territory. If it had been before, Sir Eltek would have thought the same, but since he had been to the border town, he had a completely different view of the 4th prince. Roland was a wise and kind lord, not to mention his eldest son, Ferlin Eltek, and the family's benefactor, Lady Agatha, were both living in border town. He looked at the housekeeper and ordered, "Go to the border town now and bring this information to Lord Roland." No matter what, the housekeeper must deliver this message to him. Before the housekeeper had even left the boundaries of the Eltek family's territory, Roland had already received a plea for help from Petrov. The 4 major families of the Western territories had actually rebelled. Who gave them the confidence to plot treason right under his nose? Roland immediately summoned Carter and Axe, slapping the letter in front of them. After reading it, Carter speculated that they had been planning this uprising for some time. For them to unite like this, there must be a new influential leader driving them. Axe concurred, suggesting that perhaps a larger power was now involved. They quickly deduced that it was Timothy from the royal capital. This didn't surprise them, but the second letter mentioned that the enemy had firearms. Roland wasn't overly concerned because the snow powder was no longer a secret to Timothy. However, for them to effectively utilize it, they had a long way to go. What Roland didn't understand was, even if they had the support of powerful forces behind them, where did they get the confidence to go against the soldiers of the First Army? Nightingale speculated that it might be because of the month of the demons. Currently, the roads were blocked by heavy snow, and with the demonic beasts constantly attacking the border town, they probably thought that border town would need at least 2 months to recapture the Canggu stronghold. Axe suggested they might think that having the same kind of weapons would allow them to resist the assault from border town. However, they knew nothing of the true power that border town possessed. Roland then called out Axe's name and Axe immediately stood at attention. Roland ordered Axe to put the First Army into a state of readiness for deployment and to set off early the next day. The prince loudly declared, 500 men, equipped with 6 field guns. Axe will be in charge of arranging the teams. Axe saluted in standard military fashion. Roland instructed Carter to stay and guard border town. The corner of the knight's mouth dropped instantly. He didn't want Roland to leave him behind. Roland looked at him seriously and pointed out that it was the month of the demons and the threat from the demonic beasts was greater than that from the nobles. Roland hoped Carter would guard his town well. Roland turned to Nightingale, telling her that he needed the witch's company for this journey. "Wherever you go, I'll be right by your side," Nightingale said with a gentle smile. Roland pushed the door open. Initially, his plan was to slowly integrate the nobles after establishing the city. However, this rebellion presented him an opportunity to swiftly annex the lands beyond the stronghold, and this time, he wouldn't let those nobles off the hook. In the early hours of the morning, the housekeeper reached the docks, seeking an old boatman to transport him to the border town, offering a handsome payment of 10 gold. The boatman, stuttering, explained, his boat doesn't even have a proper shelter against the snow. It's fine for river crossings, but if they head to the border town, they might survive the journey, but the freezing nights would be their end. When the housekeeper inquired if there might be someone else capable of making the trip, the boatman waved his hands dismissively. Only the larger ships in the stronghold can manage such a journey. All they have here are small boats. The housekeeper's face contorted in despair as he stared at the crimson water river. Suddenly, a massive fleet of ships was approaching. Kakosin commanded the sailors to keep stoking the coal. They were making a beeline for the stronghold. Roland was aboard, with Wendy manipulating the wind direction. Lightning had already scouted the situation inside the city and briefed the prince. Roughly 200 men besieged the castle. They had already breached the first layer. These attackers wielded weapons resembling firearms, yet they were nothing like what Roland's side used. Roland's primary concern was for Petrov's safety. Lightning relayed that Petrov was unharmed, but shaken. However, there was a pause, and Lightning somberly added that Petrov's family had suffered greatly. It seemed that Petrov had received word beforehand and had summoned his father into the safety of the castle. Yet, the rest of his family, including the countess, who remained in their home, were taken hostage by the treacherous nobles and executed one by one as a ploy to force Petrov's surrender. Seizing an opportunity, Lightning managed to slip into the castle and relayed the news of Roland's impending arrival. Petrov only had one request for Lightning to transfer to Roland. Roland listened intently. Lightning turned to him. Petrov says the debt must be paid in blood. A chilling look overtook Roland's face. Among the nobility, there was an unwritten rule: rarely would one lay lethal hands upon another of a noble title. The audacity of these nobles to inflict such harm on Petrov's family, aside from their resentment towards Roland's substantial profits from the partnership with the merchants, indicated another force was likely pulling the strings. Roland was now fairly certain that the person behind this assault was the newly crowned king, Timothy Wimbledon. He gazed towards the direction of the stronghold, and ordered coldly, "Full advance into the stronghold. Secure the docks." Atop the city walls, soldiers from the Second Army relentlessly fired upon the enemies below. The invaders had secured the city gates and launched several waves of attacks, yet they had not been able to capture the northern section of the wall. The battle had raged on since noon the previous day. The Second Army's ammunition was quickly depleting. Enemy troops, shielded by heavy shields, inched closer. Watching his comrades fall one by one into pools of blood, he found himself unable to think of anything else. The captain signaled to his squad to fix their bayonets, preparing for a final, bloody standoff. They would not surrender. They knew that surrendering would lead them down a path to certain death. He lunged at an enemy shield with his bayonet, only to be knocked off his feet by a powerful kick, his weapon flying from his grasp. Despairingly, he looked up, thinking his end was near, but suddenly noticed a looming shadow in the sky rapidly descending onto the steel-clad soldier. As the person became clearer, he realized it was a massive creature. Just as he thought they were faced with a demonic beast, a silhouette jumped from atop the creature. The giant creature tells him they are the reinforcement. The sight of the talking beast still instilled fear in the soldiers, until they saw the giant creature approach the injured among them. She helped lift them onto the creature, reassuring them to hang on, and that she'd swiftly take them to where Manhua was for treatment. The man looked at the beautiful woman with numerous questions, still unable to believe they were the reinforcements dispatched by Prince Roland. The enemies swiftly reached the top of the city walls. When they realized it was a woman defending, they burst into laughter, spouting derogatory remarks. The captain raised his weapon, thinking he'd need to protect Ashes. However, Ashes grinned, and in a flash, a silvery light slashed through the air, immediately silencing their laughter. The enemy leader was cleanly cut in half, with neither his shield nor his iron armor able to halt the blade even slightly. He hadn't even seen how the woman had attacked. The once laughing faces now froze in horror. Yet, this was merely the beginning. Ashes took a step forward, swinging her great sword in a wide arc. The movements were so swift that they were nearly imperceptible, and in moments, the adversaries lay defeated on the ground. Ashes turned to the captain, instructing him to gather the remaining comrades atop the wall, assuring that someone would soon come to transport them. Ashes immediately leaped off the wall, charging through the enemy lines with unrivaled ferocity. Her weapon danced fluidly in her hands, cutting down any who dared stand in her path as if she was merely harvesting wheat. In less than minutes, the enemy forces had collapsed. The captain sat on the ground, cold sweat drenching his back. So, this is the power of a witch, he thought to himself. Regardless, he had survived. The stronghold was surrounded by the forces of the four major families, making escape seemingly impossible. After a day and night of relentless combat, the second floor of the castle was taken. Petrov's family and his guards had been pushed back to the very top, presumably enduring the tortures of hunger and fear. Meade stared at the imposing lord's castle, recalling the secret letter from King Timothy. The message had stated that if the capital could maintain control of the Canggu stronghold until the snow melted, the royal army would rally here to suppress the rebellious Prince Roland Wimbledon. If they could successfully quash the rebel prince's influence, it wasn't impossible that Mede might be given governance over the western territories. Furthermore, he could also divide the lands obtained by Petrov's family. By then, he would be a duke in both name and rank. A knight approached to report, "The 6th Assault Team has retreated. Should they send in the ironclad squad next?" Mede nodded in agreement, signaling the knight to make the necessary arrangements. The so-called ironclad squad was a team specially designed to combat firearms, typically made up of 3 or 4 members. 2 of them would hold shields, crafted from layers of heavy iron and metal which covered them entirely. They'd slowly advance behind this protective barrier with the new snow powder weapons. Mede couldn't help but scoff internally, although the enemy's swift reaction was somewhat unexpected. By the time the united forces of the 4 major families stormed the stronghold, a significant number of the patrol soldiers and guards had already been pulled back into the castle. Nevertheless, their numbers didn't even reach 100. They could simply be worn down through attrition. It would probably be days before this news reached the ears of the 4th prince. He wondered how Roland Wimbledon would react if he were to send him Petrov's head as a gift. A steward approached, reporting something amiss at the western docks. He had dispatched 2 teams to investigate, yet none had returned. Mede casually suggested that perhaps it was just a homeless person snoring. But the steward shook his head, saying that for such a loud snore, it would have to come from a titan nearly as tall as the city walls. A soldier, torch in hand, headed towards the dock, puzzled by the darkness. He wondered where were the guards. From a corner, dozens of rifles aimed right at him. Shortly after, Roland and his rifle team appeared, swiftly taking down these soldiers. A guard stumbled back to Mede, loudly exclaiming, "The rebel king is here. Thousands of them, they're approaching the castle." Mede angrily kicked the guard. How could there be thousands? He warned the guard that if he continued with such nonsense, he'd hang him from the castle gates. The guard, not daring to dodge, knelt and insisted, "It's truly the banner of the great castle royal family." The guard then said they saw the rebel king and charged at him when a volley of concentrated gunfire took them down. He had never seen such intense shooting before. Without at least 1,000 men, how could they have instantly wiped out the noble's guard force? Mede wiped the sweat from his forehead. He figured the guard was exaggerating the numbers, probably having his wits scared out of him by the enemy's simultaneous gunfire. In Mede's mind, these snow powder weapons only had a range of about 40 steps. Although they packed a punch, their loading speed and accuracy were extremely poor. He quickly devised a plan. After the enemy's first volley, he would immediately launch a charge, with mercenaries and guards following in tow. This way, they would defeat the rebel king. When questioned about the whereabouts of the other nobles and their soldiers, the guard replied, "They have already retreated from the front lines." However, at that moment, bursts of gunfire echoed from outside the castle, just as the guard had reported. A chill ran down Mede's spine. He cast one last look at the castle before reluctantly giving the order to retreat. He commanded the ironclad squad to take the lead, with others following. They soon encountered Roland's army. Mede ordered a full-on assault. The ironclad squad held up their heavy shields with one hand, wielding their newest weapons with the other. The faint glow of their weapons and their limited range didn't manage to hit Roland's troops. In contrast, the weapons of the First Army emitted dazzling bursts of light. Those in the front, holding the shields, were instantly killed. Splinters of metal pierced through bodies, and behind the shields, a dense mist of blood rose. Before Mede could even shout the command to charge, another volley knocked him straight to the ground. Even in his dying moments, Mede couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Why didn't the weapons given to him by the king require reloading and have a short range, unlike those Roland wielded? How could there be such a difference? Roland walked into the castle. Petrov and his father were already kneeling in the hall, awaiting his arrival. The lingering scent of blood permeated the air. Approaching them, Roland bent down to grab Petrov's arm, lifting him up. He told Petrov that he had done well and that the 4 major families would pay for their deeds. Petrov trembled, apologizing through tears for failing to defend the Changji stronghold on Roland's behalf. Roland sighed, consoling him that it wasn't his fault, he had done his best. Roland knew that Petrov wasn't a battle-hardened administrator. The previous light cavalry's seizure of the city and the recent noble rebellion were proof. Petrov excelled in managing territories, was adept at trade, and had a knack for seizing opportunities. Yet, he wasn't a strategist nor skilled in combat. Had it not been for the Second Army stationing at the castle as an emergency measure, Petrov might not have lasted even 2 days. However, this didn't mean that Petrov wasn't a competent administrator. If he wasn't inclined to warfare, Roland thought, then he should be given a territory safe and away from warfare. Compared to military talents, Roland favored Petrov for what he was good at. He scanned everyone present, calmly claiming that there was a catalyst behind this uprising. It was an absolute conspiracy, with enemies scheming to subvert the order of the Western territories. They didn't hesitate to commit grave sins, conspiring against nobles and slaughtering the populace. After today's battle, he wondered how many civilians would lose their loved ones and how many homes would be left pillaged and empty. But in the end, their scheme had failed. Turning his gaze to all present, he spoke, "It's because of the unwavering resistance of everyone here that the stronghold didn't fall into an even greater tragedy." Their performance was nothing short of heroic. Unconsciously, everyone present puffed their chests a little higher. Roland continued, "However, the battle is not over. These traitors are fleeing in panic, and now it's their time for retribution. Be it the 4 major families or the royal capital," he paused for emphasis, then firmly declared, "those responsible for inciting the rebellion will face retribution. Their blood won't be spilled in vain." Tears streamed down Petrov's father's face. Roland ordered, "Starting tomorrow, the First Army will take control of the territories surrounding the Changbu stronghold. Any resisting nobles can be killed on the spot." Roland hopes to see a united Western territory in a week. Petrov and father kneeled once more. Axe gave a military salute, followed by the surviving knights and soldiers of the Second Army. Soon, everyone present knelt on one knee, standing straight from the waist up, placing their right hand over their heart, and chanting a unified slogan. "Long live King Roland!"